say, oh my goodness, he just said government was evil. Well, we're not that evil because I'm part of it, right? But the thing is that the reason why we say, and why Thomas Paine said that government is a necessary evil, is that you have to give up a little bit of your liberty to have government. You have to pay taxes. You have to provide for the government. But it's a reason why if you prize your liberty and you want to maximize liberty, you want to minimize how much you send to Washington. And you want to minimize the size of government. Think about it this way. If you're taxed 100%, that's 100% of your sweat equity that you send to Washington. If you're taxed 50%, you're half of your labor, half of your freedom's being sent. So the thing is we want to minimize government to maximize liberty. I think it's a simple argument. But there's another argument, and this argument Milton Friedman put forward. And this is the one I call the efficiency argument. Milton Friedman said that nobody spends somebody else's money as wisely as they own. And there's some truth to that. Think about it in your own life. If I ask you for $1,000 and say, I'm going to start a business enterprise, you will all investigate what the enterprise is, you'll weigh the chances that it makes money, and you'll remember when you give me the $1,000 that it probably took you $2,000 that you had to earn to get to the $1,000. But you'll make a heartfelt decision. If you ask anybody in government, even good people, do they make the same sort of heartfelt decision with your money as they do with their own? It's just inevitable they don't, and it's one of the reasons why government makes less good decisions compared to individuals. If you want to think about this in a bigger term, think about Solyndra. Here we had one of the richest men in the country was given a $500 million loan by an operative in the Department of Energy who just turns out used to be in the campaign world before they got into the Department of Energy, and just so turns out that the richest man, one of the richest men in the country who got the $500 million loan just turns out to have been a big donor of President Obama's.
Imagine that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But that's sort of a problem with
coincidence, all
giving
right.
power to government. It happens on both sides. Sometimes Republicans have powerful donors and friends, and they give out special interests as well. It's why you shouldn't have government in the business of giving out special interests. When we look at government and we say, well, how bad is it? We're borrowing $1 million a minute. We have an $18 trillion debt. People ask me, what are the top 3 reasons why you got involved in running for the Senate, leading your medical practice? I say the debt, and the debt. It is overwhelming and it threatens our country. You've seen what happens to Greece, or what happened to Greece. People say, oh, well, we're not Greece. Well, we are. We're the world's greatest country, but the world's greatest country, the world's greatest civilization can be dragged down by destroying the currency. That's what's happening. It can happen slowly, or it can happen quickly. People say, well, it's happening so slowly we're dealing with it. Well, it does, but it goes in fits and bursts. Anybody remember having a tough time in 2008? Anybody remember anyone losing their job in 2008? Anybody remember their house going from being worth $150,000 to being worth $100,000? Anybody remember their equity going underwater, their difficulty during that time? That's a panic, and a panic can happen all of a sudden. So we can't be complacent and just say, oh, we're just going to keep spending money. And we've got it on both sides, frankly. You have some Republicans who say, well, we need to spend whatever it takes on the military. Well, I think national defense is the #1 priority of government. It's what your federal government should do. But even for something that we should do, it doesn't make sense to borrow limitless sums from China to either send it to Pakistan or to put it even into our military. You have to cut spending somewhere else if you're going to increase spending for the military. We can't just borrow. Admiral Mullins, career military guy, said the #1 threat to our national security is our debt. People all the time say, we need to project our power around the world. I don't think you project power from bankruptcy court, all right? But we need to be aware of what we're doing and see that it's something that's constructive and not something that is counterproductive. People often ask me, what's the worst thing the president has done? I say, how long do you have? It's not Obamacare. As much as Obamacare was terrible for our health care, terrible for employment, terrible for business, that's not the worst thing he's done. It's not immigration law, it isn't more powers, but it's all of them collected together. It's the president collapsing the separation of powers. When we were founded in a miraculous sense with co-equal branches of government that were supposed to have checks and balances. Madison wrote that we would pit ambition against ambition. The ambition of Congress to hold on to their power versus the ambition of the president to grab new power, regardless of party. It was to keep the branches of government equal. But what's happened under this president, particularly after we won back the Congress, the U.S. House in 2010, what happened with this president is this president decided he wasn't going to win anything in Congress, so he'd just go around us. Now what occurs in our country is that most laws, almost all laws, are not written by Congress. They're written by the executive branch. Not necessarily by the president himself, but by all the different regulatory branches. Even the things we passed. Obamacare was 2,000 pages long. Regulations are 20,000 pages. Dodd-Frank, banking regulations, a couple thousand pages of legislation, tens of thousands of pages of regulations. The most expensive things affecting the economy, I never wrote on. The greenhouse gas regulation will be the most expensive regulation ever in the history of our country, and I'll get no vote on it. In fact, when Congress did vote on cap and trade, they voted against cap and trade. So they just do it now by regulatory fiat. But what's happening is it's part of the bankrupting of our country, because you can't even get rid of the people who are doing this. The people who are doing this are unelected bureaucrats. So if we talk about what we need to do, and this could be a Republican nominee or Democrat, we need to make sure that we nominate and elect somebody who believes that the power should be reserved to the states and the people, and we need to give the power back to the states and the people. There have been a lot of scandals in this administration, and when I think of the scandals, I think of the old nursery rhyme, Old MacDonald's Farm. Here a scandal, there a scandal, everywhere a scandal. When I'm asked which scandal is the worst or which one bothers me the most, I have to say that it's Benghazi. Because the thing is here we had not just one mistake, not just 2 or 3 mistakes, but a constellation of mistakes over probably at least a year's time. It wasn't just, all the talk you heard on TV was about the spin. And the spin was whether or not, it was about a video or whether it was a terrorist attack. Everybody knows that it was a terrorist attack now, but that really isn't the debate so much. To my mind, the debate, and it's incredibly important because it will have something to do with who we choose to be our next president, is that for 9 months leading up to Benghazi, there were pleas for more security, there were pleas for more help, and they were turned down. So 9 months before the ambassador is killed, February-March time period, Hillary Clinton and the State Department are asked to keep 6 Special Forces guys. She brings them home. One of the reasons they were bringing people home, they do it again about a month later, they bring 6 more. There's not many people over there defending the embassy. Part of the reason they bring them home is because of this politically correct notion that we don't want to offend the Libyans by carrying guns in front of them. I kid you not. This is from Colonel Wood, who was there. He said, the State Department directors they didn't want us to wear our uniforms or even our military boots because the freedom fighters would be offended by this. The freedom fighters, if you really want to know who they are, some of them were in our prisons. They were jihadists. They were Al-Qaeda. They hate America. They just chose to use us to get rid of Gaddafi. But they still hate America. They still hate Christianity. And these are the people who if anybody runs Libya, still runs Libya. So as you go through that spring and Hillary Clinton is bringing home Special Forces, the people at our embassy there said, we want a DC-3. Some people here probably don't even know what a DC-3 is. It's a 50-year-old plane or more, but it's a plane nonetheless. They had no plane. They wanted a plane to be able to fly around the country or to flee if they had to. Hillary Clinton State Department turned down the plane. She couldn't even spare a DC-3 for the Benghazi mission. About the same time, though, 3 days after she turned down the plane, she got a request from Vienna, from the embassy in Vienna, from our ambassador. Seems like he was greening up the embassy, and he ordered 24 Chevy Volts, subsidized a couple $100,000 per car. He got him over there to show off how green he was, and then, whoops, he forgot to get the right plugs. So he requested from the State Department a $100,000 charging station to charge his Chevy Volts a couple of days after Hillary Clinton had turned down a plane that could be used in case of emergency. Also, a month or two later, Hillary Clinton approved $100,000 for 3 comedians to go to India on the Make Chai Not War tour. So we have money to send comedians to India. We have money to have an electrical charging station in Vienna, but no money for a 50-year-old plane for them and for those in Libya who are trying to defend the mission. We get into the summertime, and there still are more requests. And Hillary Clinton, when she came to testify, said, oh, there wasn't enough money. All the Democrats said, oh, Republicans didn't give us enough money. Completely untrue. But what was Hillary Clinton spending the money on throughout that summer? Let's see. She spent $650,000 on Facebook ads. Seems like there's not enough friends on the State Department Facebook. They spent $700,000 on landscaping for the Brussels embassy. They spent $5 million. All of this approved by Hillary Clinton. Of course, if she were here, she would say, oh, I don't know anything about that. I didn't have anything to do with that. She's in charge, all right? She deserves everything she gets on this because she was in charge of the ship and she needs to accept responsibility. They spent $5 million at the State Department the summer before the ambassador was killed on crystal barware, crystal glassware. We get to August, and Colonel Wood, who's the last remaining security force in Benghazi, has a 16-person security force. He's writing cables home saying, we need to stay. He's telling the ambassador it's increasingly unsafe. The British ambassador has been pulled out because of an attack. There's a crescendo of attacks occurring. It's becoming less safe. He requests that he stay in place there. The ambassador himself, Ambassador Stevens, sends cables directly to Hillary Clinton requesting that Colonel Wood's team stay. Hillary Clinton's decision, bring them all home. When the attack occurred, there were questions. Did Hillary Clinton ever read any of these cables? So when she came to the investigation of my committee, that's what I asked her. I said, Secretary Clinton, did you read any of the cables from the ambassador? And her response was, kind of, to be put off and to act as if, who am I to even ask her questions? Her response was basically, well, that's not my job. I'm busy running the State Department. And I'm like, really? Libya is one of the 5 most dangerous places in the world, and you don't have time to read the cables pleading for more security? And I believe by Hillary Clinton, by her dereliction of duty, by her not providing adequate security for the mission in Libya, that it should forever preclude her from being considered for the presidency.
There you go. Yes, sir. That'll be in jail.
People want to know, how are we going to win again as Republicans though? We haven't won Michigan for the presidency, I think, since 1988. There's about 18 states we haven't won in 30 some odd years now. We have to figure out a way to win these states. It's possible. You win Michigan in the off years. You've got the governorship in both houses, but you tend to win in the off years. And then when the presidential election comes, you have this enormous election, we don't win. And it's primarily when more people vote, you have bigger turnouts, your bigger cities have bigger turnouts, and it's a problem that we need more African American votes. So I spent a lot of time going to venues the Republicans haven't gone to and saying, we want your vote. I've been to Detroit several times. I helped to open the office in downtown Detroit. I was in Highland Park yesterday. I was in the south side of Chicago 2 weeks ago. I've been to several historically black colleges because we need to ask for people's vote. It's as much about our attitude as it is the policy. In fact, if we can get to an equal footing on attitude, that people believe that we care for them when they're out of work or when they live in poverty, and that we want economic growth and we want their community to thrive and succeed, I think then we can beat them on policy, beat the Democrats on policy. Because frankly, look at our cities. Our cities have been run by Democrats for 50 years and they haven't done so well. We need to convince them that we care, and then we can convince them that our policy will succeed. I've got a couple of policies. I came to Detroit about 2 years ago and introduced one of them. It's called Economic Freedom Zones. It's based a little bit on what Jack Kemp used to talk about, enterprise zones. We just go one step further. We tell people it's Jack Kemp's plan on steroids. What we do is we say to a city like Detroit or a city like Highland Park, you want economic activity? Why don't we just reduce the federal taxes to almost nothing for 10 years? The thing is people think, oh, we can't reduce taxes because we need our city services. Well, they can have their local taxes. Let's just reduce their federal taxes to zero, to almost zero. So our plan takes the corporate income tax to 5%. It's 35% now. So let's say you're a business on the edge of Highland Park or out in the suburbs, and let's say you want to open a new business, and you say, well, I can't make it at 35%. Can you make it with 5% tax? What if your personal income tax were also 5%? So let's say you're a bank vice president, you make $80,000 a year, you're paying 20% income tax. What if you move down to Highland Park? Would people be willing to? Somebody's going to move there because they pay 5% income tax. We also take the payroll tax and we lower the payroll tax for the employee and for the employer. And so you get these incentives, but you have to do it for a long period of time. And so what we do is we argue that we are for a stimulus. We're not for taxing Macomb County to send it to Highland Park. What we're for is helping Highland Park bail themselves out by leaving their own money in their community and never taking it to Washington to begin with. It gives us something to say, something that we are for, that's consistent with our ideology, that actually can help. And we can argue, look, we've tried it the other way. We've tried sending the money to Washington and bringing a portion of it back. Some of it inevitably is lost in Washington. And when you're on the south side of Chicago, what they'll tell you is, frankly, they think the money is stolen through graft and patronage and the government unions. And so in Chicago, a lot of the people I spoke with are like, well, yeah, we're ready to try something different because what's working now is if you're related to somebody in government, you get a portion of it. If your cousin or nephew or somebody, you get part of this money, but it never ends up getting to the people it intended to go to. I think that if we reach out, there's no reason at all why we have to dilute what we stand for. That's the big debate in our party. Some say, oh, we just need to become more like the Democrats. If we dilute our values and dilute what we stand for, then we can win again. And I think it's the opposite. I think we need to be more boldly for what we are for. See, we were once the party that believed in cutting taxes. You remember Ronald Reagan? Ronald Reagan won in a landslide because it was clear what he was for. He was for dramatically lowering tax rates and cutting taxes. Let's do it again. I frankly think that the whole tax code, we have a 70,000-page tax code, is really scaring American businesses overseas, chasing them overseas, and chasing jobs overseas. People tend to believe that jobs are going overseas. It's probably true. How do we keep them here? Let's keep them here by welcoming the money to stay, which means you have to lower taxes and lower regulations. If a business has high taxes, high regulations, and high labor costs, what are they going to do? They move overseas. There's also $2 trillion overseas in American profit that's earned by companies that earn it overseas, like Apple has $180 billion overseas. I have a bill to lower the tax rate so they'll bring it home. We did it in 2005 and $300 billion came home. I think $600 or $700 billion would come home. When I look at the whole complex tax code, I would say we ought to just get rid of the whole thing. I think we should get rid of any place where people ask me, do I like campaigning? And I say, sometimes. And one of those sometimes was the day before I came out, or I guess on Thursday, we decided we'd come up with different ways to kill the code, to kill the tax code. So we have 3 different ways, and we're going to put it on our website on Monday, and you get to vote on which is the best way to kill the tax code. So I burn it, I throw it in a wood chipper, and then I chop it up with a chainsaw. And so we're going to put it on our website and people can vote on which way is the best way to kill the tax code. But in all seriousness, we want to wipe the whole thing out and replace it with one rate. 14.5% personal income tax, 14.5% business tax. There have been people who've run on a flat tax before. You may remember when Steve Forbes ran, he talked a lot about a flat tax. Good idea. We go one step further. The Democrats say, oh, that's only going to help rich people. So what we decided to do is to put the payroll tax into the business tax. And so if you make $40,000 a year, you're not going to pay FICA anymore. The business will. But that year, if you made $40,000 a year, you get $2,000 more in your check from no FICA, because the FICA will be part of the business tax. We still will provide for Medicare and Social Security by simply saying that it's the first thing that's funded out of the business tax. But think of the economic opportunity, think of the economic growth if we were to leave a couple of $1 trillion in the economy. And the debate we need to have, instead of shying away from this, instead of saying, oh, well, we're for revenue neutral tax reform. That's what almost everybody in Washington says they're for. Republicans. That's the bold thing in Washington, is revenue neutral tax reform. You know what that means? That means half of you pay more, half of you pay less, and the net effect for the economy is zero. We need to make the argument, where's the money best spent? Leave it in Macomb County or Washington? Anybody think it's better spent in Washington? Raise your hand. It's not. There's no way they're creating jobs. But think about if I left $10 million in Macomb County next year that you didn't send. Do you think you'd have more jobs? Do you think you'd have more wealth? Do you think the economy would do better if the money were here? That's the debate we need to make. But we haven't had that clear-cut distinction between Republicans and Democrats. We need to nominate someone who truly believes that government needs to be smaller, that government needs to be constitutional, and that we need to do one very simple thing. We should never spend money that we don't have. We should only spend what comes in. Now, some have argued, well, you know, that's all good and well, but what do you think about how we're going to defend the country? I think it's the #1 priority of the federal government's national defense, bar none. But I do think we need to think through what we do in the world and whether it's good or bad. So there's a question of whether or not intervention overseas is helpful or not. So Hillary's war in Libya, I think we're less safe. We toppled a bad guy, Gaddafi, but what did we get in replace?
Worst guy.
Chaos and the rise of radical Islam. This is the debate we'll have, and you probably will see a few people who disagree with me on the stage. But the thing is, we need to rethink what we're for. We can be for a strong national defense, but it doesn't mean that war should be the first resort. You know, what Republicans think is our greatest president, Reagan, part of his doctrine towards war and towards foreign policy was that war should be the last resort. That we should have consensus, that we should fight with overwhelming force when we have to fight, and we should fight to win. But we weren't going to go around the world saying, oh, you know what, let's create an American-style democracy in Libya. It just frankly doesn't work. We get the opposite. We are less safe. Look at Syria. You have a terrible dictator, Assad, and we've got people in our party who want to attack Assad and ISIS simultaneously. And I'm like, guys, do you realize they're on opposite sides of the wars? You will fight both sides of the war at the same time? And here's the thing. We put 600 tons of weapons, us, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar, into the Syrian civil war to try to help the moderates. Well, one CIA analyst responded and he said, the only thing moderate about the Syrian rebels is their ability to fight. So, do you know that ISIS now has $1 billion worth of U.S. Humvees? They've also got billions of our dollars they simply stole from the bank. I tell people, if you want to buy more stuff for the Iraqi army, buy them tearaway uniforms so when they run, they can take their uniforms off. There are people over there who can help. We do need to do something about ISIS. The Kurds are fighters. I would send weapons directly to the Kurds and not to Baghdad, and I would help them fight. But the debate, once again, isn't over who believes in a strong national defense. It's how we have a strong national defense. I believe in a defense strong enough to repel any attack and deter any attack. And I will use our forces if need be. But the thing is that it needs to be when we have to. It has to be when we have to go to war. And really, you know, Libya was a mistake. Syria was a mistake. We need to be aware of that when we move forward. There are 2 million Christians that live in Syria. You ask them who they want, Assad or ISIS, every one of them will tell you Assad. And does that make Assad a great guy? No, but he will protect the Christians, and he has for decades. His father did as well. But the thing is they know what will happen to him if ISIS gets there. So we have to think through some of these things. As we decide and move forward, though, as a party, what we're going to do, What we need to do is to be the party of the entire Bill of Rights. We're great on the Second Amendment. In fact, all 54 candidates running for president, I think we're good on the Second Amendment. But we need to be the party of the entire Bill of Rights. We need to be not only for the Second Amendment, but the Fourth Amendment, the right to privacy, the right to be left alone. We need to be for the Fifth and Sixth Amendment. The Fifth Amendment says the government shouldn't take your property without due process. There are many examples: eminent domain, civil asset forfeiture, where the government's taking property without ever convicting anybody of a crime. We also need to be the party of the Sixth Amendment. It says you have a right to a trial by jury, a speedy trial by jury. And you say to yourself, well, my goodness, who could be against a right to a trial by jury? Well, I had this debate with another senator from our party, and I don't like to name names, but from Arizona. And the debate was over whether or not an American citizen could be detained without a trial, without a lawyer, and sent to Guantanamo Bay for something they were accused of doing in this country. And I said, certainly you wouldn't send them without a trial, without a lawyer, without, an open process. And he said, well, if they're dangerous. I said, well, it sort of begs the question, doesn't it? Who gets to decide who's dangerous and who's not?
Everybody in Chicago.
Think about it this way. And this is why we need to be the party of justice and the Bill of Rights. We were the party of emancipation. We were the party of civil rights. More Republicans voted for civil rights than Democrats. It was held up for decades by filibusters from Southern Democrats. But think about it this way. There was a guy named Richard Jewell, and everybody said he was the Olympic bomber. Everybody said he did it. He fit the profile. He had glasses. I see some of you out there. He had a backpack. He was an introvert. Certainly he had to be the bomber. Within an hour, everybody on TV said he was the bomber. The only problem was, he wasn't. He was completely innocent. In fact, the news media had to pay him millions of dollars because he was completely and entirely innocent.
And rich.
Think about if Richard Jewell had been a black man in the South in the 1920s. What would have happened to him? This is why you have rules, and this is why the Bill of Rights and the Constitution isn't about restraining you, it's about restraining government.
There you go.
The Sixth Amendment also says you have the right to a speedy trial. There was a 16-year-old black kid from the Bronx. He was accused of a crime, and he's put in Rikers Island for 3 years with no trial. He was never tried, in fact. Of the 3 years he spent in jail, 2 years was in solitary confinement. He was beaten by guards and gangs alike. He tried to commit suicide several times. And sadly, about a month ago, he did commit suicide and killed himself. This shouldn't happen in America. You shouldn't be accused of a crime, never convicted. In fact, the person who actually accused him of the crime wasn't even in the country legally, and then when they went to find him, had already fled. So the thing is we can't, we need to be the party, and when we are the party that says, you know what, we defend the Second Amendment, but we're going to defend the Sixth Amendment just as much as the Second Amendment, then we're going to dominate, and people are going to come to us who have never come to our party. That's the party I want to be part of, and I hope you do too. Thank you.